So here goes, my first attempt to tackle an actual Souls game. I've previously covered a Souls-like on the channel, and that was in the form of Lies of P. In this video though, I'll be looking at the game that kicked off the Soulsborne genre of games, and my favourite Souls game, Demon's Souls. If you are looking for a great game to play in order to ease yourself into the Souls genre, then Demon's Souls is the best place to start. The difficulty, something that Souls games are known for, is a lot easier to manage, and the difficulty curve is a kind one, to say the least. Well, sort of. Originally coming out on the PlayStation 3, this game received a remake in 2020 to coincide with the launch of the PS5, and the lucky ones who were able to play it at launch due to the PS5 supply issue fiasco considered it to be an exceptional remake, while some others felt that the remake missed some of the atmosphere, music and vocal performances that made the original so good. But I'm here for the story, and I'll be using footage of the remake to explain what exactly happened in this game because, well, the game looks visually stunning. Before we begin, please be aware that there will be spoilers in this video for Demon's Souls. But with all that out of the way, let's begin. So as with a lot of these types of games, a lot of stuff has already happened before you even jump in and start killing things. On the day of creation, on the first day, humans were given souls, and with them, clarity. But the humans started deviating from the reason they were given souls, and they began messing around with something called the soul arts, and used them to harness the power of magic. A magic called soul power, which involves sorcery and miracles. They used this power to fight one another, and to try and seize one another's power. Humans who mastered the soul arts were mages who themselves became the masters of their world. However, their incessant messing with the soul arts and their hunger for more power would have far-reaching consequences. This leads us on to the Old One. God saw the damage that was being committed, so on the second day, he created the Old One. The Old One is a serpent-like entity which is made up from trees, plants, and nature. The Old One is also the original demon, a poison, and would become the source of power for the soul arts. The Old One was in a slumber state for many, many years, just waiting for the moment that it is awakened and can unleash itself upon the world. Due to their connection to the Old One, these soul arts woke up the Old One, and a deep fog enveloped the world. The first time this happened led to what was known as the First Scourge. One of the Old One's purposes is to create other powerful demons, whose sole purpose, pun not intended, is to consume the souls of living beings, all driven by the insatiable hunger of their master, who is a bottomless pit of, well, nothingness. You see, the soul is a life source, and losing one's soul will result in the owner of said soul descending into madness and becoming soul-starved. This results in that person attacking anything on sight, as they attempt to regain their own soul and to restore their sanity. The demons themselves would devour these souls, and these souls would create a larger soul, known as a demon's soul. When the fog covered Boletaria and the land was cut off from the outside world, the humans fought to defend their lands against demons. Those who bravely ventured into the fog to help would never return. They eventually managed to place the Old One back into its slumber. However, as a result of the First Scourge, the damage was done. The world was still riddled with demons, and the humans' fight was far from over. There weren't many lands left, so in an attempt to put things back together, if you like, was to create 6 archstones, creating a link between these lands, entrusting the archstones to 6 leaders in these lands. These 6 archstones were the Archstone of the Covetous King in the Boletarian Palace, the Archstone of the Digger King in the Stonefang Tunnels, the Archstone of the Tower Queen in the Tower of Latria, the Archstone of the Giants in the Northern Lands, the Archstone of the Shadowmen at the Shrine of Storm, and the Archstone of the Chieftain in the Valley of Defilement. When the Old One was placed back into its slumber, it was sealed inside a place called the Nexus. The Nexus was a conduit for which these lands would be linked. It would also be a temple by which souls in the northern lands of Boletaria would be able to move between the different lands to search for their physical bodies. The people who managed this would tie themselves to the Nexus and would give up their humanity, becoming half-living sentinels of the fabric of reality. Their goal now was to protect it should the need arise, and to warn future generations of what can happen whilst waiting for the Slayer of Demons to arrive. The practice of soul arts was also banned by the Monumentals, and it was to be a prohibited form of magic. Given the consequences, that is understandable. But humanity never learns.
We neutralized the Old One and banned the soul arts. Then we spread the Archstones, and in order to mend reality, Monumentals we became. However, man's memory of history is ever short, and before long he repeated his mistakes. The monumentals perished, and the archstones were long forgotten.
Thousands of years after the First Scourge had ravaged the lands, one kingdom in particular was doing quite well. This was the kingdom of Boletaria, whose ruler was King Allant XII. He was by all accounts a good king. He loved his subjects and made sure his kingdom was fiercely defended. One day, King Allant, along with his brother Raidel, discovered the Nexus, and there, inside the Nexus, was a blind demon called the Maiden in Black. She taught King Allant all about the soul arts, and King Allant took this knowledge back to Boletaria with him. News of these soul arts carried throughout the kingdoms until the prohibition on this form of magic was lifted, and it was now being used freely once again. Boletaria itself had begun to thrive. It prospered. Life was pretty good in the kingdom of Boletaria. But King Allant had other ideas. He became of the idea that in order to save humanity, he had to end it. He took a sword, appropriately named Soulbrant, and went back to the Nexus. That's right, instead of the Old One being awakened through the soul arts being used, it was instead awakened by King Allant himself. His idea was that the Old One would feast upon all of the human souls, therefore ending their very existence. King Allant then decided to head deep inside the Old One, and as a result of the immense power that the Old One gave him, he became a demon, but due to his body not being a suitable vessel for demon power, this turned him into a horrific blob of flesh. The power that he did have allowed him to create a demon in his previous image, just as powerful, and that King Allant would be the leader of the demon armies put in place to ensure that his plan was set in motion, and this led to the Second Scourge. Due to the fog now coming back, the people inside were bound to it, or until the fog was lifted. This now leads us to the knight known as Valafax. He was one of the Twin Fangs, two warriors who were part of King Allant's round table, with the other warrior being named Bior. With Bior staying behind to protect the kingdom, Valafax was able to find a way out of the fog via a fissure and took the news of what had happened in Boletaria to other kingdoms. Word of what had happened, along with the disappearance of King Allant, would reach other kingdoms and other lands. In response to this, various knights, priests, and nobles set out for the kingdom of Boletaria. In the meantime, one of the 6 lands, the land of the giants, was overrun, and even after Boletaria sent thousands of knights, it fell to the demons. The Archstone was destroyed in order to try and contain it, but this did not work. But there is hope. A lone warrior approaches the fog. This person, the Slayer of Demons, he has a female voice which addresses them as the brave soul who does not fear death, that she will guide the Slayer in order to lull the Old One back to its slumber. The Slayer then steps through the fissure and arrives at an outpost. They step out into the botanical gardens of the Boletarian palace. Fighting various dredgelings and Boletarian soldiers, the Slayer walks through a fog gate and comes face to face with a massive creature, the Vanguard Demon. The Slayer tries their best to defeat it, but succumbs and dies. The Slayer then finds themselves in the Nexus. The Nexus is considered to be a sacred place that holds together the northern lands of Boletaria. Remember I mentioned the Archstones? Well, the Nexus is sort of like a conduit for these Archstones. Think of it like a central hub. The woman speaks again and says that the soul of the lost is drawn from its vessel. Let strength be granted so the world may be mended. And this woman is the Woman in Black. She was one of the Old One's most dangerous and deadly demons, but she now resides inside the Nexus, desperate to place the Old One back into its slumber. She appears to have been blinded by candle wax, and she is tasked with keeping the Nexus well lit. She's been there in the Nexus for a very long time, bound to it by a nexial binding which is visible around her ankle. She's able to absorb the souls of humans via Soul Sucker, where she is able to withdraw a soul from its vessel, and she is also able to use souls to bestow power upon someone else. She tells the Slayer that the 5 Archstones will guide them to the Outer Lands. For now, the Slayer is in soul form, manifested as a result of their soul being tethered to the Nexus. Only by obtaining a demon's soul can the Slayer regain their corporeal form. Also here in the Nexus are a few individuals. One is a crestfallen warrior. He is depressed and has given up on his quest to slay demons. He doesn't trust the Monumental given the fact that he's been bound to the Nexus. One of the first things he says to the Slayer is to warn them about the soul arts, that the more power the Maiden in Black bestows upon them, the more of their humanity they will lose. He also sees the Monumentals as fools for their role in awakening the Old One. There is also Blacksmith Baldwin. He used to work in the Stonefang Tunnels as a blacksmith but fled the Nexus when the fog came. He wears a weapon named Hand of God. There's Stockpile Thomas, and Thomas is a widower, and his family, his wife and daughter, were killed at the Boletarian Palace when the fog came. He carries immense guilt as he abandoned them and fled to the Nexus, his injuries being tended to by the Maiden in Black. And finally, for now at least, there's the Worshipper of God. She follows the church and a man named Saint Urbain, and she is a relatively new convert. She used to live below the Boletarian castle when King Allant left on his journey when he found the Nexus, and when the demons came she fled to the Nexus with what she thinks was the help of her father's miracle stone shard. But more on the church and Saint Urbain later. Touching the first archstone, the Slayer travels to the Boletarian Palace. Upon arriving, the dangers present become very real. It seems that in the chaos, two dragons have made the Boletarian Palace their home. Dredgelings also roam the grounds equipped with swords and shields, but their weakness is easily exploited. They are soul-starved, hungry for souls to devour and to give back to their masters. The palace is heavily destroyed, to the left of the entrance are the execution grounds. The executioner is named Meralda. She was renowned for being a complete nutcase and is extremely dangerous. She uses her power to command the souls of the people she's executed by summoning them as black phantoms. The Slayer soon finds Stockpile Thomas's wife and daughter hanging from the ramparts, and cutting them down, the Slayer retrieves a jade hair ornament, something typically worn by lowly commoners. A large gate is firmly shut. This is the way forward, so the Slayer must find a way through. Heading up to the ramparts, they encounter some Boletarian soldiers, still human. There are also blue and red-eyed knights, noblemen who are loyal to King Allant and who are now strengthened by the demon souls. With swords and shields crafted from the finest and strongest ores from the Stonefang mine, they are certainly a tough adversary. The Slayer also comes across a dredgeling that is not hostile. This one still has its sanity. And it's also not long until the Slayer comes across someone who is in a spot of bother. This is Ostrava of Boletaria. He has travelled from the southern kingdom of Latria in order to find his father. The Slayer can of course kill Ostrava, but for the sake of lore and story, he will save him. After rescuing Ostrava, he thanks the Slayer and walks off to continue his quest. Finding a way through the area and avoiding the dragon's fire, the Slayer manages to get the gate open, and a massive spear flies through the doorway. Heading through the now open gate, the Slayer faces off against a massive mound of flesh, surrounded by its minions called hoplites. This is the demon Phalanx. It's the corrupted soul of one of King Allant's 3 famed warriors, Longbow Ulan. She was an archer who used a special bow, the White Bow. She was viewed as somewhat of a coward, as she would stay far behind her troops so as to avoid being harmed. This demon, and it being protected by hoplites, is a representation of that, a mirror of her soul itself. Taking out all of the hoplites exposes the now defenseless Phalanx, and the Slayer disposes of the demon, taking its souls and the power within, and thus restoring the Slayer back to his corporeal form. Returning to the Nexus, the Maiden in Black directs the Slayer to speak with a Monumental. Ascending the Nexus, all the Monumentals have perished, except one. This Monumental explains what happened during the First Scourge, the Soul Arts and the Old One. The 4 remaining Archstones have now been unsealed. The Monumental offers the Slayer a quest, to lull the Old One back to its slumber, and to seal it away for all eternity, to prevent the deep fog from consuming everything. Let's look at some more people in the Nexus. On one side you have the religious people, the church, and on the other side you have the mages and the witches. Neither can bear to look at the other, hence why they separate themselves. In terms of the church,
a miracle is a heavenly act, but spells are the acts of demons, the work of soul arts. They have similar effects, and yet one is clearly evil, and the other is clearly good. Magicians, in the end, are mere servants of the demons.
And in terms of the magicians,
Master Frake is a great man who has systemized the magic of the soul arts to make it possible for human imitation. By observing the state of Boletaria and the demons within it, he is likely to pave the way for greater things. All the more reason that I must meet Master Frake as soon as possible.
The magician asks the Slayer to save his master, Sage Frake. He says he's the hope for mankind. One of the followers of God, the Acolyte, also mentions that he abandoned Saint Urbain somewhere out of fear. From here, the Slayer can go about their business however they wish, but for the sake of a coherent storyline, I'll be tackling this video in sections like so, but as with all my videos, feel free to navigate the video using the chapters below. Heading forward from the Phalanx Archstone, the Slayer must progress across a path to the next section of the palace. It's once again showing signs of conflict, and Dredgelings, knights and human soldiers await. The dragon is once again back and hungry. The Slayer has to run fast in order to avoid being roasted alive by the dragon's breath. If the Slayer is feeling particularly bold, they can stand and shoot the dragon with its arrows until it falls and they retrieve its soul, the very powerful Crimson Drake soul. Once again, the Slayer comes across Ostrava. He needs help again, so after helping, once again, Ostrava thanks the Slayer and then heads off to continue his quest and to search for his father. Defeating two blue-eyed knights and heading through a fog gate, the Slayer of Demons comes face to face with the fearsome Tower Knight. Behind the Tower Knight is one of many Fat Officials. Fat Officials were the torment of the villagers of Boletaria shortly after the Second Scourge. The Tower Knight itself is the corrupted soul of the second of King Allant's warriors, Albert, the Knight of the Tower. The colourless fog has resulted in Albert's soul, which left his body after he was slain in the Lord's Path, becoming a 30-foot knight. Equipped with a massive shield and lance, he attempts to prevent the Slayer from reaching the inner ward. Taking out the archers that flank the Tower Knight, the Slayer takes the hulking monstrosity down. However, the Slayer cannot progress beyond this fog gate, as they require the soul of an archdemon. Returning to the Nexus after this and speaking with the crestfallen warrior, he mentions his rotting corpse being somewhere there in the Boletarian palace, but then due to his body rotting away, he starts losing all of his memories, even forgetting who the Slayer is, and later on, he is gone only for his warrior soul to be left behind. The Slayer then visits the Stonefang Tunnels. The tunnels, also known as Tunnel City thanks to their maze-like structure, are essentially an excavation site under the control of King Allant. The actual city of Stonefang can be seen in the distance. A city of miners and blacksmiths as depicted on the Archstone. Stonefang was the site that provided the materials needed to produce weapons and armour for soldiers and knights of Boletaria, and as such the miners of Stonefang were extremely dedicated to their craft, devoting their lives to it. Their stubbornness to continue to work despite the colourless fog saw them become soulless husks lacking sentience. Their appearance changed as they became more dragon-like, and they continued to hack and chisel away in the tunnels even to this day. The tunnels are rumoured to be located above the shrine of an ancient dragon god, which was said to have been worshipped. As well as that, it's said that the flames from which blacksmithing began in Stonefang came from a beast, a fire demon that lurks below in an underground temple. Fat Officials have been placed in charge of the workers at the tunnels. They are to effectively oversee the workers and the mining of ore, which, as previously mentioned, was to be used for weapons and armour. They utilise a whip in order to encourage the miners to work harder. They are also used as security in order to stop unauthorised people from entering the mine, and I guess to stop those unauthorised people from stealing the mine's resources. Arriving, the Slayer comes across a filthy man. He trades materials from the mine in exchange for souls. It's considered that he obtained these materials that he sells by stealing them from the miners who are too busy working in order to notice. One thing he mentions is that he knows the location of a crystal lizard nest, but he refuses to tell the Slayer where it is because, of course, that would be bad for business. Anyway, avoiding being squashed by huge boulders, the Slayer enters the mine. The workers are busy, in some ways too busy to notice that someone is present, although some take exception to the Slayer's presence. They are, of course, being watched, being made to work by Fat Officials, and there's a few present inside the mine. Making their way through it, fighting off any workers that attack, and seeing the bodies of other demon slayers that have attempted to pass through, and meeting Blacksmith Ed, who is the brother of Blacksmith Baldwin in the Nexus, the Slayer manages to douse a large amount of lava blocking the way forward. In doing so, comes to an area covered in spiders' webs, a grim indication of what is to come. The Slayer needs to battle and defeat the Armor Spider. It's not clear where this horrible beastie comes from, but it's clear that it's guarding the entrance to Tunnel City. It's a tough foe and uses fireballs along with its pincers to attack the Slayer, but eventually he is able to defeat it. Pushing forward into the Tunnel City, the Slayer finds more miners hard at work. He encounters 2 Black Phantoms. Black Phantoms are basically the malicious forms of a soul, which will attack and kill living beings in order to obtain souls. The Slayer also discovers the crystal lizard mine that the filthy man was talking about. It's easy to see why he chose not to tell the Slayer where it was. Lots of valuable minerals here. At the heart of Tunnel City is the Molten Swamp, rumoured to be a grave for dragons. It's here that the Slayer meets Patches, nicknamed the Hyena. Patches is a thief, and he likes to screw people over, setting traps for them in the hope that they will die, and then he would pick their corpse for treasure to sell. He tries this with the Slayer by trapping them behind a bugbear, but getting out the Slayer can confront Patches, who, impressed the Slayer survived, gives him a flame resistance ring. After this, the Slayer pushes on and continues, carefully descending down into a chasm, and at the bottom encounters another fog gate. He walks through it. This fiery monstrosity is the Flame Lurker. This fight takes place in the underground temple that was mentioned on the Stonefang Tunnel Archstone. The Flame Lurker is the fire demon that is spoken of. It had been imprisoned there in the temple's prison, I guess. Now, given that Stonefang itself was a city, and that the guards of Boletaria moved in and took control of the mine, it could be that they imprisoned the Flame Lurker, but who knows, it's all theories when it comes to this beast. It's there in the temple, which itself was constructed for the worship of the dragon god. What's interesting though is what is located nearby. A corpse on the ground which has 2 items, melee fist weapons called Hands of God. These Hands of God speak of the legendary Big M who lived long ago. Big M, it seems, used his fists along with the Hands of God to slaughter dragons. It's certainly possible that this is the arena in which Big M would fight dragons to the death, maybe even for sport, and is perhaps his final resting place. One theory behind the Flame Lurker is that it is the demon-possessed spirit of Big M. What makes this more plausible is that the Flame Lurker uses his fists to great effect, and being hit by them is brutal. As for appearance, in the remake, the Flame Lurker looks more beastly. In the original PS3 version though, his face seems to be a little more human, and somewhat resembles the king depicted on the Archstone. It's also possible that since Blacksmith Ed and Blacksmith Baldwin have 1 Hand of God each, they could be the descendants of Big M himself. Blacksmith Baldwin though speaks of how powerful his brother is.
I'm pretty strong myself, but even I don't compare to Ed. He's a beast, I tell you. The man must eat dragon tails and wrestle stones. If you heed my advice, you'll avoid crossing him. I reckon he'd prove a lot more trouble than most demons.
Anyway, after a tough fight against the fearsome Flame Lurker, avoiding being burned alive, the Slayer kills it and obtains the demon's soul. Another interesting thing is that a sarcophagus lies there in the temple, and this could link into the king of the Burrowers that is mentioned by the Monumental. It could also be that the Flame Lurker was the king of Stonefang. Moving forward and into the temple itself, the Slayer hears a deep breathing coming from behind a fog gate. Pushing through it, he sees the dragon god, the deity that was revered by the people of Stonefang. Its physical appearance was manifested as a result of the fog developing these lands, and came about from the large dragon bones in and around the temple, which the city's burrowers had likely stumbled upon at some point, coming to revere and worship the dragon god, taking care to maintain the shrine itself. It's almost as if the dragon god's manifestation came about from the legend thought up by the burrowers at Stonefang. In terms of the shrine though, it does seem however that there should be an elevator leading to the bottom of the chasm, but either one was not built, or it was removed after the fog came and the dragon god came to be, as a way to stop people from going down into the shrine, but again that's just a theory. The bones of the dragons are said to contain ores.
Ores are transmogrified spirits. Their presence blesses the weapon.
Bones of the dragons exude
ore.
We can see from going down into the crystal lizard nest that the ores in the nest are coming from the bones, and it seems that the crystal lizards feasted on these ores, resulting in them growing out of their bodies. But back to the dragon god. It's angry, but the Slayer now needs to claim its soul. To the left-hand path, the Slayer can find a strange sword, seemingly useless as it's blunt. Moving to the right, the Slayer has to avoid the dragon's gaze, and force his way through to the other side where a giant ballista awaits. It shoots a magical arrow at the dragon and impales its left-hand side. Pushing to the other side of the area, the Slayer fires another ballista and impales the other side of the dragon. The massive beast collapses onto a ledge, and going down to it, the Slayer finishes the dragon god off, claiming the soul of this archdemon. This demon's soul can be used to channel the soul arts via magic and the firestorm spell, in which the caster creates a storm made up of fire, channeled from the power of the dragon god itself. After this, the Slayer can come across a man named Scriveer. He's a wanderer and has a keen interest in treasure. One in particular that he's interested in there in Stonefang is a sword, but Scriveer was too scared to go down to the temple area. Can't blame him, to be fair. The Slayer shows Scriveer the sword he got from the temple, and he examines it.
Oh, wonderful. The arts of swordsmanship applied in a perfectly useless manner. Look at that. Oh, don't mind me, thank you. It was a pleasure. Please take this as a small show of thanks. Take care of this one, will you? She's a stunner.
The sword itself is described as something that was used against the demons, but one that is mocked by local blacksmiths. One interesting point to finish on is that blacksmith Ed appears to have scales on him, indicating that when the fog came and he refused to leave, he started the process of transforming. This is in contrast to Baldwin, who doesn't appear to have as many scales, as Baldwin of course fled to the Nexus. Anyhow, with the archdemon's soul obtained, the Slayer leaves the Stonefang Tunnels. The next destination is Latria. Heading to the Archstone of the Tower Queen, the Slayer has now arrived in Latria. So the point of entry is the Prison of Hope, although there doesn't seem to be much hope here at all. The location itself is mainly based around a tower, which seems to be of great importance to the area. As seen from the carvings on the Archstone, it seems to be a place of nobility and riches, where learned people gathered and studied. What were they studying? Well, that's anyone's guess. But most likely alchemy and magic, and more importantly, the soul arts. Hell, the nobles even wore jewelry that would help them extract even more souls from the dead. It does appear that the many torture devices in the prison indicate a much darker element to this place. But let's go back to what the Monumental said regarding Latria.
One to the wise queen of the great ivory tower.
He speaks of a queen. This queen is depicted on the Archstone as having a halo around her head. The Tower of Latria was built for Queen Yormadar. The queen ruled, and the prince consort, I guess, her husband, sat alongside her. Her kingdom included, as discussed, a prison, a church, and of course the ivory tower. But all was not rosy.
The queen banished that depraved old man from the land. He returned in strange golden garb with foul demons in tow. They pillaged great Latria, land of the learned, and shut us away in this prison. Since then, they've been feeding off our souls, telling us over and over that if we go above, we will be granted redemption. I know the truth. The church goddess may die, but never for long. We are trapped below forever.
As an act of revenge for her banishing him, the man, now going by the Old Monk, had the Queen's family locked away in the prison and Latria fell. It's possible that the people came to try and save the nobility too. We'll uncover more story as the Slayer progresses through Latria. Leaving the cell, the Slayer soon comes across creatures that the Old Monk brought back to Latria. These are mind flayers, and they are incredibly dangerous. Using their magic, they can paralyze someone and then use their tentacles to remove the victim's brain, killing them, or at least severely injuring them. The cells are full of people kept prisoner there. There are also various torture devices, no doubt used by the Old Monk's demons. In one of the cells, the Slayer can meet the former noble's wife.
I've known better days. I was once the wife of nobility, and I have some nice things to show for it.
The noble's wife sells some interesting things, one of which is the Ring of Avarice, which, like the silver bracelets, allows for increased souls to be collected from fallen foes. She also has something called Widow's Lotus, something that counteracts plague, but we'll explore that a bit further into this section. From the look of the noble wife's face, it seems that she's been the subject of heavy torture. There are two more people that the Slayer can find. One is Sage Frake, the Visionary.
I am Frake. I have been trapped here for an age. Perhaps you could help me out of here. I am a sage, and I can lend you my power in return. Oh, but take heed of those tentacle-headed guards.
If freeing him, he heads back to the Nexus and gives a bit of information about himself if the Slayer is somewhat proficient in magic.
Could you bring your demon souls to me? As I determine more about the essence of the soul, I can teach you new magic. A demon's soul is no mere amalgamation of lesser souls. You have your wits about you. Surely you understand.
He continues on and mentions the old monk and his power.
I was defeated and captured by the Golden Usurper past that cell. Be wary of him, for he manipulates souls. He has power over vile, murky souls, those susceptible to madness and paranoia.
The apprentice also tells us a little bit about Sage Frake.
Master Frake is a great man who has systemized the magic of the soul arts to make it possible for human imitation. By observing the state of Boletaria and the demons within it, he is likely to pave the way for greater things.
It's possible that he used to be part of the church, but he seems obsessed with dark magic, indicating that at one point he turned his back on the church, as he speaks against them rather passionately.
You have a connection to the disciples. Do not pay any attention to them if they speak poorly of me and my magic. Prayer is for the foolish, quaint, and soon to be dead.
He thinks that the ability to use soul arts is due to the presence of the Old One. But moving on, the Slayer can also meet and free Lord Rydell, who, remember, is King Allant's brother. It seems that whoever put Rydell there in that cell intended for him to suffer.
You are a sane one, are you not? My name is Rydell. Please, liberate me from this jail. I have precious little time. I must retrieve an article from my corpse. As you can see, the only thing that remains of me is my soul. My corpse lies in another cell. I fancy it a fine rotten mess by now. I've no interest in my corporeal flesh, but I left upon my person a keepsake of my late wife. I will soon fade into the beyond. My only wish is to do so near that token of my beloved.
It's unclear as to who Lord Rydell's wife is, but some speculate on the Souls Lore Wikidot that it could be the Queen, and that the old monk locked Rydell in there to punish him. Right, so regarding plague, so the prisons seem to hold a fair amount of now dead thieves and assassins. There's a weapon obtained in the prison called the Baby's Nail, and its blade is coated in a substance that afflicts the victim with plague. Approaching the church, the Slayer is confronted by the black phantom of an assassin who is using one of these plague-coated blades. Defeating her, the Slayer can go up a spiral staircase and into the upper levels of the church, and on one side finds a dead body wearing an assassin's outfit. The fact that this assassin is found here may indicate that the noble people were being targeted in particular by these assassins, which as well is probably why the nobles have Widow's Lotus and Noble's Lotus on them, which counteracts poison. The balcony here is a mess, indicating that a fight took place, and the other corpse there has a silver catalyst on it, which of course is something given to magicians of Yormadar's school of magic. On the other side of the upper level, the Slayer can come across a man performing a ritual, and he seems very focused. He describes himself as a humble servant. The Slayer can choose whether to leave him be or to kill him, which leads us on to the first boss of Latria, the Fool's Idol. Entering the church through the main doors, the Slayer encounters a doll in the likeness of the Queen. It contains her soul, but it's now being controlled by the old monk. According to the Soul Ray spell, the Queen was once a gifted sorceress. Scattered around the church are prisoners who are convinced that the Fool's Idol is the real Queen, and therefore appear to approach her with reverence. and judging from the stained glass windows in the church, she was worshipped by her subjects. The prisoners are out of their cells for a reason which we'll get to in a minute, but the Slayer cracks on and battles the Fool's Idol. This doll has the ability to use magic, which is why it seems that the Queen's soul is inside the doll, and she has the ability to replicate herself, which can also confuse the Slayer. She also manages to set paralyzing tiles on the floor, freezing the Slayer in place, much like the way the Mind Flayers do. Discovering the real doll though, the Slayer takes her down. Now, if the lyre on the church balcony was not taken care of either, his spell that he is casting will actually resurrect her, restarting the fight. Afterwards, with her demon soul in his possession, the Slayer approaches the altar, but is carried off high up into the tower by gargoyles. According to the Archstone, a deep malice awaited the prisoners who were in the church and who were carried up into the tower. We're about to see what that means. Traversing the perilously high walkways of Upper Latria, the Slayer fights off numerous gargoyles, which are of course under the control of the old monk. The Slayer then spots a large beating mass of flesh in the distance. Fleshy parts coming to and from the mass are blocking the way forward, so the Slayer needs to destroy it. It's being held up by huge chains. Proceeding up a tower, at the top he finds 4 men up there, chanting and seemingly imbuing the chains with added strength. Taking these people out, the chain breaks. That's 1 down, 1 more to go. Dropping down on another platform, the Slayer sees a man inside a cage. His name is Yurt. He asks if the Slayer is there to fight the demons, and if so, to let him out of the cage. The Slayer can choose whether or not to, but that's a choice we'll refer back to later on in the video. But for now, the Slayer descends in another of the cages and arrives in a grotesque swamp at the bottom of Upper Latria. The creatures there are the fruits of the old monk's experiments. What he was trying to create here is anyone's guess. It's clear that the prisoners were being lured into the church. The Fool's Idol appearing as their queen gave them brief hope, but after being carried off by gargoyles, they were meshed together into centipedes, into these monstrosities, and they were discarded. Making his way through the fleshy swamp, the Slayer eventually ascends a second tower, and just like before, takes out the 4 men strengthening the chains. The second chain snaps, and the mass of flesh drops, smashing into the bottom of the tower. Many creatures emerge from it. With the path now cleared, the Slayer ascends the winding staircase up to the top of the tower. Here we meet another of the old monk's creations. Before the Slayer can ascend to the throne room, he must defeat not 1 but 2 monstrosities called man-eaters. These things are clearly some kind of experiment carried out by the old monk too, as they are a mashup of many different things. They have a man's face, wings, and a snake tail, although during the battle it seems that the serpent is acting independently of the man-eater, as it will bite the beast. This stuns the man-eater temporarily, but it makes it more powerful as a result. After defeating these 2 mugs, their soul can be used to create the Agony Needle. This weapon has barbs on it and hooks into the flesh, stealing souls. It's indicated here that this could be related to what we see the serpent tail doing to the man-eaters. The Slayer can then ascend to the top of the throne room where the old monk resides, wearing his golden shawl that the former noble's wife spoke of earlier on. What's clear is that this robe is both powerful and dangerous. It had been able to keep the old monk alive despite the fact that he'd been withering away, and as we saw, he summoned a black phantom he'd enslaved, and the robe attached itself and the old monk's soul to the next most powerful evil there, the Black Phantom. The Slayer then enters the throne room and battles the old monk 2.0. Whilst that's going on, let's talk about the old monk, and more specifically the golden or yellow shawl. The yellow shawl seems to be a reference to Hastur, or the King in Yellow. Hastur is capable of mind control or possession, and the shawl is capable of possession, attaching itself to apparent evil. The old monk, by extension, appears to be in control of the Mind Flayers, who themselves seem to resemble something from the Cthulhu mythos. The robe corrupted him more and more over time. One thing that's interesting to note is that in the throne room on the portraits of nobles, their faces have been scratched out. After landing the final blow to the old monk's Black Phantom, The Slayer receives the second Archdemon's soul, and now must go in pursuit of the third. It's time to leave Latria. The Slayer heads to a wet and windy island called the Shrine of Storms. This wind-battered island was once the location of worship by the Shadowmen, a group of pagan barbarians who saw the storms as holy and worshipped them as such. These barbarians were led by a shaman, as evidenced by the monumental's description of the person that received one of the 6 Archstones.
One to the shaman of the Tempest-worshipping Shadowmen.
The island was a place where people would mourn fallen legends, and of course these soul arts were used in this location, although what these rituals looked like or entailed is again open to interpretation, given the vagueness of the lore. But we can clearly get a hint as to one part of the ritual here on the Archstone. We can see a body is being burned. Again, we'll uncover more information about this mysterious island and its practices as we progress. Atop the entrance to the island is a fortress, and ascending the stairs, the Slayer is attacked by seemingly reanimated dead men, skeletons clad head to toe in armour and wielding large ceremonial blades. Archers are there too, firing arrows imbued with magic. Fighting his way through them and defeating a vanguard demon, the Slayer moves into some underground tunnels and discovers a man inside a cell. Freeing him, he's called Blige, and he's a grave robber. He shares some information about the shrine.
This shrine was used in a ghastly ritual by an ancient tribe. They had long perished, and now the demons have put the souls to work. At least here you're killing things that are already dead, like skeletons and shadow lurkers. That's what I like about this place. Better than killing those poor soul-starved humans, right? This is where the ancient barbarians offered their honoured heroes to the storm. To seek storms in life and meet storms in death. That was the warrior's code. But all that's left here now is a fine pile of dust.
Blige had gone to the island after having heard of treasures there. He got tricked by someone we've met already, Patches. As Blige just mentioned earlier, the barbarians would offer their honoured heroes to the storm. The first Archstone of the Shrine of Storms also mentions flying beasts. It says that these flying beasts appearing has resulted in the souls of the dead being lured to the island, and that these souls are entering the skeletal remains of the undead and giving them life, essentially. These flying beasts in the skies are carriers of souls, of course, but also a green ore called Cloudstone, which is used to fortify shields against magic, as Cloudstone contains light-blocking properties. But let's continue on. The Slayer comes to a fog gate, and after dealing with a troublesome guardian standing at the fog gate, the Slayer enters and has to do battle against the Adjudicator. As its name suggests, as adjudicate means to preside over or to judge, people on the island would take their deceased to the Adjudicator, and the Adjudicator would judge whether or not they were worthy of being taken down the ritual path. These deceased were judged according to the description on the Adjudicator's shield, which features a scene of the dead facing their judgment. It says that the subject, dubbed the Hero of Storms, is to live a life of courage, and that he is not to devour a single bird of the sky. This indicates that the birds were perhaps sacred to these people. The large beast has a golden bird on his head, called the Harvest Gold Crow, and this bird is described as the Master. The bird is the Adjudicator and the demon. The large body is just a host. Anyway, if the owner of the body before the Adjudicator had been judged to have committed either of these things, then their body would be gnawed upon until, well, it was gone. Battling the Adjudicator, it has an open wound with a blade sticking out of it, meaning that either it tried to end itself due to imminent corruption because of the fog, or someone very large had attacked it, but again, who knows. The Adjudicator is guarding the ritual path, and the Slayer needs to progress. Whacking the large beast a few times causes him to fall, and the Slayer gives the crow a few whacks and kills it. That's another demon's soul collected. Side note is that turning this demon's soul into a weapon gives the meat cleaver. It describes the cleaver of having cut delectable cuts of meat. This indicates that the large body got fat due to eating the many demon slayers that passed through on the island, as detailed in the description for the regeneration miracle. So after the deceased person's life was judged to be worthy of the ritual, and after the dead had been adorned with a token of their heroism, they would be taken along the ritual path by the Shadowmen. This is a perilous trek across narrow ledges, as the Slayer themselves would also discover. This task is made all the more difficult by the attacking skeletons and the flying beasts, who shoot a large green glowing shard at them. The bodies are then cleansed by what's called bright water. This rare glowing water is found deep within the shrine, and is a liquid that has been refined for its magical properties. Its properties allow the consumer to regenerate their magical power over time. Slugs sat in the bright water drop sticky white slime, which imbues a weapon with magical power. These fallen heroes are then mourned by the storm. Moving along the ritual path, the Slayer enters a strange area where a Reaper appears to be summoning and commanding a load of spirits. Could these be the spirits of the Shadow Men? The Reaper himself could be a shaman. Not the shaman who was given the Archstone, but a lower level shaman, as there's a few of them present in the shrine. Anyhow, Blige tells the Slayer of Demons that he's heard something.
Have you been to the altar where the Reapers summon shadows? Well, I think someone may be trapped in the lower cavity. I heard them praying for dear life. Pity the poor fool. He probably fell for one of Patch's old tricks.
Investigating, he can come across the devious Patches. He talks about treasure down in a pit, and looking over the edge, Patches kicks him down there, telling him that once he is dead, he'll rob his corpse and sell everything he has on him. Down there, the Slayer encounters Saint Urbain.
Heavens, did you fall for that little devil's trap? Well, I did the same. He fooled me, and now I am stuck here. The reverberations seem to suggest that we are connected to the outside. A fearsome dark phantom stands between us and freedom. But have no fear. God will cleanse us of evil. Pray with me. Umbasa.
Seems that Saint Urbain's acolyte fled after Patches had sprung a trap and abandoned his leader. Getting rid of the Black Phantom there, Saint Urbain thanks the Slayer for his assistance and heads to the Nexus. Later, when speaking with him there, he says to bring him demon souls, and he will cleanse the souls and create miracles from the power of the souls. But getting free now that the path out is clear, Patches, of course, panics at the appearance of the Slayer and says that he was only joking around and gives him a fancy ring as a way of him apologizing. Moving around and coming to the end of the ritual path and moving through the underground Brightwater Springs, the Slayer encounters another fog gate. Moving into the Altar of Storms, a body lies upon the altar. This must be the penultimate step to the ritual, as the body is lying in a pool of bright water, ready for the next step. Anyway, the next opponent the Slayer needs to battle is the Old Hero. So if you want to get an idea of what the Shadow Men were like, I guess the Old Hero is as good a place as any. He's been brought back to life as a result of the colourless fog. He's been adorned with golden jewellery, so this is maybe how he looked at the point that the ritual was at its final stage. He's completely blind, so hunts by sound. So if the Slayer is really quiet and launches surprise or quick attacks before retreating quietly, the Old Hero will go down pretty easily. Not much else is known about the Old Hero, but one interesting thing is that when using his demon soul to craft the miracle's second chance, the miracle indicates that it wasn't created in line with the pagan worship carried out by the Shadow Men, but it was instead created as a denouncing of it, the church's rebuttal to the Shadow Men's worship of the deceased. After the ritual path and performing the ritual itself, the fallen heroes' bodies were then offered to the Storm King. This is the Storm King. This beast, which resembles a stingray, according to the Archstone, is a manifestation of the thoughts and feelings of the Shadow Men, made possible by the colourless fog, who in turn worship the beast, which is this world's archdemon. The Slayer of Demons is now in the Monolith Forest, aptly named due to the large monoliths on this part of the island. Approaching one of the monoliths, the Slayer grabs a large sword, pulling it from the ground. It's very old, but this sword is named Storm Ruler. According to legend, it was used by the Shadow Men of old, who rented the storm clouds from the sky itself, and with the sword, they were able to control the storms. Wielding this large sword, the Slayer of Demons points it to the skies, and he too is able to command the storm. He uses it to take out the smaller flying beasts, and eventually, after dodging many projectiles, he takes out the Storm King too, obtaining the Archdemon soul for his troubles. That's 3 down, 2 to go. We've got a couple of things to tie off before we depart. There's the matter of Sparkly the Crow. Ascending a small hill, the Slayer can come across a crow named Sparkly, high up in a tree, and this crow likes shiny items. The Slayer can give shiny and sparkly things to the crow and receive a blessing in return in the form of a gift. Now, I'm not sure what this means, but the relevance here again links into the birds being regarded as sacred by the Shadow Men, and again given form by the colourless fog. Let me know your thoughts on this in the comments. On arriving on the island, the Slayer is able to spot a man standing above the archway looking out across the stormy seas. Now, depending on something called World Tendency, the Slayer can speak with Satsuki.
I am Satsuki. I seek a keepsake of my father. Have you seen the sword inscribed Makoto? I will offer you demon souls if you can help me find it.
Dropping into the pit where we found Saint Urbain, the Slayer can find a body, and on said body, the Makoto sword that Satsuki was looking for. What's interesting to consider is that the Black Phantom that was blocking Saint Urbain from leaving the pit was dual-wielding katanas. Could this have been the Black Phantom of Satsuki's father, or maybe even just a relative of Satsuki? Anyway, returning to Satsuki, two outcomes are possible. Approaching him with the Makoto equipped will cause him to attack the Slayer for their insolence. Alternatively, the Slayer can give the sword over to him, and he says that he needs to try it out and attacks the Slayer, forcing the Slayer to put Satsuki down. This begs another question as to what Satsuki's father, if it even was his father, was doing there on the Shrine of Storms. Perhaps he himself was a demon slayer arriving through the fissure like many other slayers. Perhaps it's not his father, and perhaps the sword was stolen by a demon slayer who was at some point in Satsuki's homeland, but again, who knows. And finally, heading out on the ritual path, you can come across a bunch of dead storm beasts. However, there's no explanation as to why these are here. Did something in this area draw them towards it, and they simply got stuck in there and died? Again, let me know your theories. But now let's move on, and instead of going to the next world, we'll journey back to the Nexus, as we need to cover some tensions there. So basically, as mentioned earlier, people who use the soul arts to do magic and those from the church don't really like each other very much.
The pious lot and the magicians in the Nexus despise one another. Did you notice? They never sit in sight of each other. The fools. What good comes of childish rivalries? We are all prisoners here.
After the First Scourge, which remember happened due to messing around with the soul arts and magic, many people's view of magic itself was that it was to be shunned. This resulted in many joining the church, which was named the Temple of God. They believed that the use of the soul arts had in some way angered God, as his creation did not use their souls for that which they were given, for clarity and the like. They also thought that God had sent the Old One as punishment, as it said that on day 2 God sent a poison.
If you truly are a disciple, then you must have a talisman in God's image. Heavenly miracles occur in Boletaria through the talismans. God has granted this accursed land a special power. It is God's way of telling us we must stand against the demons.
The disciple of God also says that he is fighting the demons in the name of the Lord. The magicians and witches practiced a dark form of the soul arts. Magicians and witches would differ in their study and use of the soul arts, but that's something we'll get to soon. The Slayer can choose to give captured demons souls to either side and learn spells that he can use or miracles. He must use a catalyst for the spells and a talisman for the miracles. However, upon looking at the description for the Talisman of Beasts, this throws an interesting point into the equation. It reads that the Old One is actually God, so it could be that the God that Saint Urbain and his followers have been worshipping has been the Old One all along, as magic and miracles have all been coming from the same place. This is something that Sage Frake mentions in conversation.
And heaven forbid the day you find out what their so-called God really is.
Again, whether or not this is true is to be decided by the player, as there's not yet an explicit answer as to the identity of God. But let's move on to the next Archstone. Alright, so the Slayer next heads to the rancid, festering area known as the Valley of Defilement. The Slayer, from speaking to various people in the Nexus, has heard of this place.
Have you ever visited the Valley of Defilement? The bog there is filled with the corpses of honourable knights too foolish to stay out of harm's way. Well, you may have heard of some of them. Vito the Moonlight Knight, Rizaya of Istarel, many, many, many more. I reckon they left behind some fine armour and weapons. Why not have a look and see what you can find?
Estraya of the Valley of Defilement. The last I heard, Saint Estraya of the West was accompanied by the knight Garl Vinland. She would never be corrupted by souls, not under the protection of such a renowned knight in his charmed armor. Surely it is mere slander. Sadly, the weak are prone to such backstabbing.
One name keeps popping up, Saint Estraya. Maiden Astria is one of 6 female saints. Despite his name, Saint Urbane is not a saint, not in the sense that Maiden Astria is. But what's her connection to the Valley of Defilement and why is she there? Well, that's something we'll get to as we journey through the valley. As the first archstone for this world states, this humid valley is a haven for the used and the forgotten, that its habitants are afflicted by poison and plague. It references Maiden Astria in that people who wander into the valley are attacked, and that the habitants of this valley offer up those souls to the woman who showed them compassion. Arriving, this place is indeed festering, the home of neglected people who were at one point discarded and abandoned in the valley. From the description in the PS3 original game here, it states that these people have been thrown away, which possibly indicates that they were at one point unwanted children left there by parents who did not want them. This place is also a dumping ground and was very likely where the sewage of the more privileged and wealthy residents in the kingdom of Boletaria was discarded. Plague-carrying rats feast upon the corpses of demon slayers who failed in their journeys. On the way through the depraved chasm, fighting small depraved ones and giant depraved ones along with rats, ticks, and all manner of desperate creatures after the slayer's soul, he can come across a spear stuck in the ground. The spear itself is called Istarel. It belonged to someone that Patches mentioned. Its description states that it indeed once belonged to the Holy Knight Rizaya, and that it increases the wielder's resistance to plague and poison. He also meets a woman known only as the Filthy Woman. She is there and has taken advantage of the opportunity to sell treatments for poison and plague to passing warriors. Supply and demand.
How many years has it been since that witch Astria came to this valley with that squid-headed knight? Those ridiculous white robes of hers. I swear I caught her glaring at my son in disgust. Yes, it's true. She's as nasty as they come. And she's a demon to boot. Not that it surprises me.
After proceeding through the rest of the chasm, the Slayer comes to a fog gate and enters. He has to fight Leechmonger. The Leechmonger is made up of, you guessed it, leeches. This is the manifestation of the filth, squalor and disease in the valley, given physical form by the colourless fog and its demon soul. Having leeches thrown on him by Leechmonger, the Slayer is eventually able to defeat the demon. With the demon soul of the Leechmonger demon in his possession, the Slayer can go back to the Nexus and either use its power to obtain the Cure miracle from Saint Urbane, or the Poison Cloud spell from Sage Frake. After moving forward and looking out over the Swamp of Sorrow, which is the place where all that is unclean ends up going, the Slayer moves through it trying to avoid the poisonous swamp waters. In the waters are more foul creatures such as swamp jellies. There are creatures in the air too, as the Slayer is set upon by giant mosquitoes. They attack in numbers and attach themselves to the Slayer, suck his blood momentarily, but thankfully they are fairly weak and easy to kill. Eventually he comes across a woman named Selen Vinland.
Why? You are one of the sane ones, are you not? I am Selen of the West. I seek my brother Garl Vinland, the knight who accompanied Saint Astria on her travels. I believe they settled here. If you happen to see my younger brother, please tell me. I must share with him the last words of our father. I heard an unflattering rumor about Saint Astria. It was that herb peddler. She believes that Astria is herself a demon. She has no reason to lie, but surely she must be mistaken.
Continuing on through the swamp, dodging a number of slugs, giant depraved ones and shamanic depraved ones, the Slayer comes to what appears to be a large settlement where these depraved ones, these outcasts, live. He speaks with the Filthy Woman again.
Ever since that demoness came here, everything has turned foul. This was a much better place before she came. I was the apple of every man's eye. You're here to rid us of her, aren't you? Well, don't show her any mercy.
Proceeding onwards again, battling through depraved ones, the Slayer comes to another fog gate. This is Dirty Colossus. Again, as with the Leechmonger, this demon is made up of and given form as a result of the demon's soul within it, and is again a representation of the foul, rotting nature of the Valley of Defilement. The Dirty Colossus fires out putrid flies that afflict the Slayer with disease, and these slowly eat away at his vitality. Nonetheless, the Slayer defeats the beast and claims the demon's soul. This soul can be used to learn the Acid Cloud spell from Sage Frake, but the final area awaits. It's time to confront the archdemon of this world, Maiden Astria. But a bit of background. So as explained earlier, Maiden Astraea was also Saint Astraea and one of 6 saints. At some point, Maiden Astraea, herself of noble birth, had heard of the Valley of Defilement and had felt great sorrow for the inhabitants that had been left there and neglected. So she travelled through the fissure in the fog with her companion and guardian, Garl Vinland, who himself comes from a highly regarded family belonging to a religious group in Boletaria. He wields a large blunt weapon that he calls Bramd. Maiden Astraea's aim was to save all who were trapped there. Upon getting there, she slowly lost her faith in whatever god it was that she served, due to the suffering there in the valley. As a result, she gave herself over to a demon's soul, and in line with what was said on the Archstone about showing compassion, she took the souls of the suffering beings there in the valley as a way to remove the pain from them. And that is why Sellen Vinland mentions that the place itself seems strangely pure despite the grime.
I find something odd about this place. It brims with grime, but at once feels strangely pure.
This is due to the Maiden Astraea. This is also why the depraved ones and other creatures there attack the Slayer, because they wish to give the souls to the Maiden Astraea as thanks for helping them. They would also bring her trinkets and treasures. Across from her are the corpses of many soldiers that had likely been offered up by the wretched husks that she took the souls from, or they were demon slayers that had wandered into there and Garl Vinland had killed them. In reality, despite her good intentions at the start, she had become a demon herself and had turned the beings in the valley into mindless husks. Approaching her, she sends Garl Vinland to deal with the Slayer. 2 things can happen here. The Slayer can avoid Vinland and take out Astraea, or the Slayer can just take out Vinland. Either way, if approached, she ends herself. The Slayer now has the soul of the archdemon of this world. After this happening, the Slayer can later return and will find Garl Vinland's Black Phantom. Killing it and sending it from that world, he drops the Vinland crest. The Slayer can take this back to Sellen Vinland.
That crest? A Vinland heirloom meant for my younger brother. So, my brother and Astraea have both strayed from the path of God. The poor souls. Perhaps their hearts were too pure. Umbasa. Oh, traveling warrior. I hesitate to ask, but can you part with that crest? Garl has strayed from the path of righteousness, but I wish to have the heirloom in honor of our Vinland blood. I shall reward you in kind. Thank you, kind warrior. As Garl's sister, I express my deepest thanks for your honoring of his name. Please accept this as thanks. Perhaps you will have use for it, as he now does not. May you receive God's blessing.
As for the sanctuary, there are plague babies in the blood. It's pretty grim stuff. Whether these are just representations of the babies that were abandoned by their parents and again given form by the fog is unclear. But it's now time for the final part of the Slayer's journey. Heading back to the Boletarian palace, the Slayer approaches the large gate leading to the palace's inner ward, the most important part of the palace. Due to this being the most important part of the palace, the guards stationed here are tough and high in number, with many knights, soldiers, assassins and fat officials guarding it. At some point, having taken out a couple of fat officials, including the one goading the Slayer earlier on, the Slayer saves Ostrava for the 3rd time and also receives a set of keys. These keys unlock a door somewhere in the palace, so backtracking, the Slayer finds the door, and after killing another fat official, he receives another key, this one covered in blood, and he also rescues a prisoner there, Bior of the Twin Fangs. So earlier I'd mentioned King Allant's Round Table, and 2 brothers, Valafax and Bior. That Valafax had gone out to travel through the fissure to spread word of what had happened there in Boletaria, that Bior had stayed behind. Well, Bior obviously got captured by the fat officials at one point and was thrown in the cells. With him back at the Nexus, he talks of Ostrava, whose real name appears to be Ariona.
I heard an odd piece of news from a merchant Dragling. He claims that the son of the king Ariona has come to Boletaria alone. Ariona is a wise and kind soul, almost too kind. He would not be safe in this accursed land without protection. If you find Ariona, do look after him, and tell him to return to the Nexus immediately, and that Bjorn of the Twin Fangs will look after His Highness.
He'd used the name Ariona so as not to draw attention to himself. But there's something we need to quickly clear up. Valifax. When fighting Executioner Meralda in the execution grounds of the castle, the Slayer can descend and find a brushwood armor set. It's exactly the same as the one Bjorn wears, so this must be Valifax. He went through the fog when the Second Scourge started in order to warn people of the situation in Boletaria. Did he come back at some point? Was the real Valifax dead? And the Valifax that went out his demon? His phantom? Maybe the phantom went out to try and lure as many souls to Boletaria to help as he could. But in line with most of the lore in this game, it's left to interpretation. Anyway, back in the Inner Ward, the Slayer uses the bloody key and comes across a large tower. Ascending, a fat official is at the top but won't lower the stairs, so the Slayer gets crafty and dons a fat official's uniform. The stairs are lowered and the Slayer kills the fat official. There he speaks with and approaches Yuria the Witch. If he is still wearing the fat official's clothing though, we get an idea of what they were doing to Yuria. Wearing their own clothes again, the Slayer speaks with Yuria, and she says that she is able to walk and that she can make her way to the Nexus. And later the Slayer can meet with her. It seems that Yuria was born holding a ring, called the Ring of Magical Nature, which means a cursed witch has been born.
I was branded a witch at a very young age, and have been persecuted ever since. Although I never had ill intentions, this black craft of mine is intrinsically evil. If there is a God, he gave us souls to do good, not to practice witchcraft. My accusers detested my dark arts for good reason. For the path I have taken is tainted. This has been one of my realizations since coming to Boletaria.
Yuria can teach the Slayer her brand of magic, darker spells. In the Inner Ward, the Slayer comes to a horde of soldiers blocking the route ahead, and a fat official is with them, but he soon scurries off beyond another fog gate. Fighting through the soldiers, the Slayer passes through the gate. This is Penetrator, or rather the knight known as Metas, Knight of the Lance. If the Slayer went to the trouble of rescuing Bjorn earlier, then he pops in to help. Penetrator is taken down and the Slayer claims the Demon's Soul. The Penetrator's soul can either be used to learn magic that imbues a weapon with light, or to curse the blade instead, in line with the Penetrator's own sword. Continuing on, the Slayer is now headed towards the King's Tower. There he spots 3 soldiers standing on and next to a dragon that had been killed. Behind them are 3 black phantoms. These are the souls of Metas, Knight of the Lance, whose legend was brought to life as a demon as Penetrator, Longbow Ulan, whose legend, remember, was brought to life as Phalanx, and lastly Albert, Knight of the Tower, who of course was brought to life as the demon, the Tower Knight. Defeating them and pushing past more enemies, the Slayer has to dodge the fiery breath of one of the dragons. Managing that and watching Bjorn get absolutely roasted, keeping the dragon preoccupied, the Slayer moves towards the tower. Ostrava is there.
Oh, it's you, is it? My father is up above. Well, sounded like him anyway. A demon in his shape. I began this quest to ask my father his reasons. To drag him back to the path of righteousness. But it seems it was all in vain. Please, tell my father. In his depraved state, he can only bring peril to these lands. This key opens Boletaria's mausoleum. Inside the mausoleum lies Father's sword, Demon Blade, twin of Soulband. Use it to bring an end to his madness.
Before ascending the tower, the Slayer can go to the mausoleum and uses the key. Inside, he finds the old king, Doran. According to legend, well, word is that old King Doran is a demigod. Doran's legend is another thing that the fog has manifested into his physical appearance. On entering, old King Doran talks about the sword Demon Brand, and says that the Slayer can claim the sword by showing him their strength and the power of their souls. After a short battle, old King Doran tells the Slayer that they have proven themselves and invites the Slayer to take the sword. The sword itself was discarded by King Allant due to the fact that the blade becomes more powerful the less demonic the wielder is. He chose to wield the sword's counterpart, which works the other way round, and that sword is Soulbrand. After obtaining the sword, heading all the way back to the King's Tower and battling Ostrava's Black Phantom, the Slayer ascends in an elevator and prepares to face the false king, Allant. Now remember, this is not the real King Allant, it's a demonic imposter. The real one is elsewhere, as we'll soon see. Many close to the king consider the rumours about the king having caused the Second Scourge as complete nonsense.
Our great king was a magnanimous leader. He was stolid, spirited, caring of his subjects. He fought valiantly against the vile and depraved. And the seditious claims that our Lord brought this scourge upon us, they could only be fabrications woven by jealous conspirators. That must be it. It must be.
Anyway, fighting the king's avatar, he's extremely strong, but ultimately the Slayer, having been strengthened throughout his journey by all the demon souls that he's collected, defeats the false king Allant, claiming the final archdemon soul.
How did you defeat my demonic reflection? How many souls might you have devoured, I wonder? The rest is up to the Old One. If it is to be, then you shall be beckoned.
Before returning to the Nexus to speak with the Maiden in Black, we need to discuss something called world tendency. A lot of the world events, such as meeting Executioner Meralda, freeing Ryden and Latria, meeting and dealing with Satsuki in Shrine of Storms, meeting Selim Vinland and fighting her brother Garl's Black Phantom, amongst others, are influenced by world tendency. The previously mentioned events are attached to what is called pure white world tendency, where more humans appear and less phantoms appear. This world tendency is improved by slaying demons and removing the corruption from the world. If you die too many times in human form in a certain world, then that world will become more susceptible to demonic corruption, and as a result humans are less, demons are strengthened and are much tougher, and more Black Phantoms appear, such as Scrivener's Black Phantom. This is called Black World Tendency, and at all the way black, a pure black tendency, entities called primeval demons appear. These useless beasts, no seriously, they just sit there trying to bite you, carry within them a colourless demon soul. There's literally no explanation for them, other than they show up in pure black world tendency. Now, in addition to world tendency, there's also character tendency. If the Slayer goes around murdering NPCs, then their character tendency will drop towards black, just as helping NPCs will move their character tendency towards white. But let's focus on pure black character tendency. At some point whilst in Upper Latria, the Demon Slayer can meet and free Yurt, the Silent Chief. Yurt carries a sword called a Shotel, which is used by assassins. If the Slayer frees Yurt and lets him go to the Nexus, he will one by one start assassinating NPCs in there, such as Saint Urbain, Sage Frake, Patches, and so on. If the player kills Yurt and is a morally questionable character with pure black character tendency, then a sly figure will be waiting on the upper floor of the Nexus. This is Mephistopheles, and she is an agent of the Order of the Soul, and she speaks with the Slayer.
I can see that you have killed before. No one can blame you for that. Demon souls are too precious to relinquish. Perhaps a slayer like you would have an interest in my offer. I want you to kill Saint Urbain and his followers. You will be rewarded amply. Do we have an agreement? A reason? Ha! Just think of it as an opportunity to remove a competitor.
Her job, quite simply, is to remove anyone in the kingdom of Boletaria who know how the soul arts work, so that her organisation can harness the power of the soul for themselves. That is Saint Urbain and his acolyte, Sage Frake and his apprentice, Patches, Bureau of the Twin Fangs, Ostrava of Boletaria, and Yuria the Witch. This explains why this order have a strong presence in Latria, given that there are so many there who practice the soul arts. After making a choice to decline or accept her offer, let's just say for the sake of this section that the Slayer accepts, he goes around killing the people in the Nexus however he sees fit, and reports back to Mephistopheles. After carrying out all of the work, it seems that, shock horror, she was using the Slayer to do her dirty work and tries to kill him, given that the Slayer also knows how to utilize the soul arts. A Slayer will end up putting her down. But anyway, let's reverse all that senseless killing and head into the endgame. The Slayer returns to the Nexus with all 5 archdemons slain. Speaking with people in the Nexus first, a noise is emanating from underneath the Nexus, but some interesting conversations take place.
As you know, souls are a source of wicked power, emanating from the demons. King Allant was overcome by lust for such power, and has placed Boletaria in her present predicament. Old Frake and the Candle Maiden are no exception. From where does that howl come? That is no demon. It sounds more like a poor, hungry child. Do you have any idea what it might be? Something about it puts me at profound unease. May God watch over us. Bless us and all of Boletaria.
You have destroyed all of the demons. You soon shall hear the call of the Old One. Then the Candle Maiden shall guide you below the Nexus, where the Old One awaits. She will lull the Old One back to slumber. That is, after all, her purpose.
But one of the most interesting conversations takes place with Sage Frake.
Why, you have defeated all the demons, have you not? This ghastly howl. The Monumental has spoken of it before. There is a question I have long had in my mind. It is whether we are right to banish the Old One. But I now have the answer, and it is a resounding no. Listen closely. The Old One must not be cut off from us. If the Candle Maiden tries to entrap it, kill her. Then, absorb the souls of the Old One for yourself. The Old One is an unfathomable vessel. It contains all the souls collected by all demons. You will gain the power of a king, and I will gain knowledge from beyond. And that, my dear friend, is the righteous path. You must not allow trifling matters to dissuade you. The demon soul is ripe for the taking. If truth be told, that woman has been tainted by demons herself. She would thank you in her death for relieving her agony.
Yuria also shares her concerns about Frake.
But I am afraid that Frake, too, has ventured down the wrong path. He has become obsessed with the dark arts.
Frake believes that humans are able to evolve to do the work of the Old One. With the idea planted in the Slayer's head about how powerful he could potentially become, he takes the Maiden in Black's hand and they drop down into some ruins. A bit about this place though. This place, which appeared in the game's intro sequence, could have been the first temple built, and of course is the location where the Monumentals had lulled the Old One back to sleep after the First Scourge. This could have been when the land was still called Murd. But the Old One approaches.
Old One, I have granted thy wish. A new demon. Come now, be good.
Heading inside the Old One, cutting back branches and vines, the Slayer hears the voice of King Allant.
You have been chosen by the Old One. Will you seek the everlasting demon souls? Or has the monumental blinded you? Whatever your choice, you are our first visitor. May you be welcome here.
The king has been reduced to a mass of human flesh. Desperately crawling around, King Allant explains that God created the Old One that will feed on their souls and put an end to the tragedy. Allant is carrying Soulbrand, but can barely use it due to his current form. Defeating him and putting the king to rest, Allant still believes that everything he's done is because he truly believes that everyone, every human being, does not want to go on. The Maiden in Black enters.
Thy work is done. Slayer of demons, go back above. The Nexus shall imprison thee no longer. I shall lull the Old One back to slumber.
Alright, so from here there's a good ending and a bad ending, but let's get the bad one out of the way first. Recalling the words of Sage Frake, telling the Slayer just how powerful he could become by consuming the Old One's demon soul, he kills the Maiden in Black, meaning that she cannot lull the Old One back into his slumber.
The Old One senses a new and powerful demon by its side. And before long, the world will be engulfed by the deep fog. Bring more souls.
So yeah, that's a pretty bad ending for the entirety of humanity, but let's finish on a happier note now and look at the good ending. Whilst putting the Old One back to its slumber, the Maiden in Black tells the Slayer to go back to his world, that his soul is no longer tied to the Nexus. He then leaves, making sure to take the Soulbrand sword on the way out.
The Old One, along with the Maiden, was swept back into the lulling fog. Boletaria was spared from the demons, but also lost its knowledge of the soul arts. The souls lost during the pandemonium were never retrieved. And today, the unstable world has another monumental to hold its fabric together. A brave new hero of unprecedented power.
At the end of all this, one question remains, and it stems from something the crestfallen warrior said.
Have you met the last surviving monumental? Those fools revived the Old One on a whim. And now, they've trapped us here in the Nexus in a desperate attempt to undo their mistake. It's all a travesty, if you ask me.
Do you think there's any truth to this, or are these just the ramblings of a man with no hope left? Someone who hated the Monumentals for trapping him there in the Nexus? Did they rouse the Old One to lure a new demon slayer there to take his place? As the narrator just said that the Slayer is now a new Monumental. Let me know what you think. And that's it for the story of Demon Souls. I love this game, so as you'd imagine, putting this video together was a lot of fun. As mentioned earlier, the lore is very ambiguous in this one, and you're left to piece a lot of it together through item and spell descriptions and optional conversations with NPCs. I've tried to include all the useful information in this video. There are also some great videos out there on the in-depth part of this game, and they include more references to background story and background information, but this is a surface level covering of this game's storyline and world. If you enjoyed this one, then please leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. Comment your thoughts below, but for now, take care and I will see you in the next one.